All right, guys. I think we'll make a start now. I'd like to say thanks for bearing with us. I think with the bad weather out there was a sudden shortage of taxis at the wrong moment in time. So thanks for bearing with us. And we've obviously delayed by a few minutes to give everyone a chance to have a snack and a bit of a mingle before we kick off. So anyway, I'd just like to say on behalf of the sponsors, that's the Testing Consultancy and Tricentis, we're very pleased to host the second STF, Singapore Testing Forum event for 2014. So it's great to see a number of familiar faces here, people not just been once or twice, but I see people I've seen at least 3 times before, so that's great. And so anyway, the lineup for tonight is we have 2 speakers. I mean, those that have been before will probably be familiar with the format. So 2 speakers. The first speaker we have is Rowan Jackson. He's the founder of CMI for a strategy development and implementation company. Rowan founded the company, has been running it for 14 years now. Prior to that was a management consultant in several industries for some time, but started off his career with 20 years in the Royal Marines and wanted to set him up for that management consulting role. Anyway, Rowan's going to present on the use of external customer research data to improve testing. Following that will be a chance for a Q&A session. We'll then have about 20 to 30 minutes for some more refreshments, a bit more networking. And then we'll have our second speaker for tonight, Leah Stockley. Again, those that have been before will have heard Leah speak. And I'm sure several of you know Leah personally anyway. So Leah's been a tester for many years now. Tester, test manager, test director. And most recently we're very pleased to welcome Leah to the Testing Consultancy. She's joined us as Head of Enterprise Testing. And Leah will be presenting on, or having an interactive session on software engineering culture. Okay, so with that, we'll make a start. Rowan?
Thanks very much. Good evening to you all. Thank you for inviting me here. It's great. A few things about introduction to begin with, and just to help you to set the scene. Tim kindly mentioned my time in the Royal Marines. I actually did 2 years here in the Royal Marines, and that was 1971. And I was just saying earlier on, the tallest building in Singapore then was the Singapore Hotel on Orchard Road, which I don't think exists anymore. And the next tallest building was that one, the Fullerton Hotel. So there's a bit of change happened. The other thing that I do notice, and it's relevant to what we're talking about this evening, is there has been, in my time in the Marines, was a focus on excellence. The Marines is a high-performance organisation, and it still is, getting even better today. This year it's 350 years old, 350 years of excellence. So there's some interesting things we can pick up and take from an organisation like that. I focus in what we do with clients on high performance. So we try to achieve breakthrough results for our clients by helping them to execute strategy properly. Most of you will know, and that's why I'm here, that strategy execution is the biggest problem in most businesses. It's why many of them don't work. Many of the things that they try to do don't go right. The focus, therefore, is very much on that. And to illustrate the story of the story that I want to start with is to help you to think about some of the things that you're doing. And this is a true story of a company in the insurance industry. Some of you might work in insurance. A few years ago, noticed that its competitors were increasing the speed at which they were able to deliver services to their clients, whether the clients were business to business or business to consumer. And so this company decided in the business to consumer, in the motor industry environment, to implement some changes to software in their company that enabled them to deliver services to their customers much, much faster. Okay? So they spent a very large amount of money on doing this. It took quite a lot of time, and as you will know from personal experience, there was a lot of pain and grief in bringing these changes to existence. And at the end, they brushed their hands together and said, we've done that, now waiting for a good customer response. And to their horror and shock, instead of making their customer satisfaction figures go like that, the customer satisfaction figures went like that. Anyone have a guess why? Just from your experience in testing. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, they did not consider clients' requirements or expectations?
Absolutely. They had no understanding of them. And so what they did was they made a decision internally to make some changes which were the view of the internal managers and not the view of their customers. And in fact, the consequences for this change in software and the output that they delivered to their customers was that the actual documentation had increased errors on it. This is data about customers' cars, the location of their homes, their telephone numbers, and these other bits of data which we have to have on the cover notes of our driving insurance certificate. And so this is an interesting example, and I want to help you to think about that in the context of what I'm talking about tonight. Okay? Do any of you have similar stories like that? We've gone and improved the wrong thing. Does that sound familiar?
Many stories.
Many stories.
I can't leave the bank where from my key, so practical experience is always like this. Yeah.
Practical experience. So one of the things here we need to think about, not just what is it that we need to be able to do, but how can we do it? Because you're not necessarily in the driving position. You're not necessarily in the ability to actually state what should be done. You are the person downstream from that decision. And so one of the things I'd like to help you to think about, and this is where the first part of my talk, is where should companies be going on this sort of thing? You know, what's the scenario they're thinking about? And one of the things that I notice when I'm delivering workshops and facilitating, as I do most of the time with companies, is that many of the organizations don't actually have a systematic way of doing things. Sound familiar? Sounds very random, doesn't it? There's a lot of stuff that happens extremely randomly, okay? And yet, when you look at high-performing organizations, their decisions are based on, first of all, experience, but then that experience is translated into a systematic way of doing things. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Some of you may remember this story. In January 2009, a plane took off from LaGuardia Airport in America, carrying 155 people on board. And in 2 minutes of that flight, of that aeroplane, it suffered a bird strike. Both engines were put out. The captain, who was a training captain for United Airways, managed to land the plane on the Hudson River. Do you remember the story?
Yeah.
Okay. Why am I telling you that story? Because he managed to do something which everyone thought was absolutely amazing feat. Land a plane on water. Like, how many people have done that successfully before? Not many. Except that the pilot, whose name was Chelsea Sullenberger, had done it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times before. He was a training captain. He taught people how to fly airplanes. And he'd done it hundreds of times before on simulators. And he said, I knew exactly what to do, it's just that I hadn't done it for real. And what he did was he went through checklists. You go through checklists, don't you? Okay? It's one of the drills that you do. You go through checklists. And those checklists are designed to make sure that things are actually right. He said, not only was I going through the checklist, but the co-pilot was going through the checklist. I could hear this, and I could hear the cabin crew going through the checklist that they had to go through with the passengers in the back. Excellence, as Aristotle famously said, is not an act, but a habit. The checklists that you use are habitual. They are designed to make high performance. That's what it's about. So thinking about that in the context of what we're doing, and thinking about high-performing organizations, I want to start with what do high-performing organizations actually do. They perform 6 times better than their comparator companies, which is a pretty amazing difference. Okay? Here are some of the things that they tend to do. I'm not going to go through this list, you'll be pleased to know. I just want you to pick out the one that is there. What's this saying about them as businesses in the markets and the community within which they work? What's it telling us? Anyone?
Interested.
They're interested. So it's more of an interest, to be fair. Yeah. They're deliberately keeping in touch with the people who actually pay their salaries. Yes? I frequently remind chief executives this fact when they talk negatively about customers and employees, but mainly about customers. Don't forget they're the ones who pay your salary. I have great fun teaching people this. Okay? So we need to think about this in the context of what you're doing and how things work out. Here's an example of an organization that did this. It's a pharmaceutical business in Japan. Any of you know Boehringer? Heard of it? It's a German business, 17 billion euro business. Okay, 2,000 employees in Japan. The business was going badly, and as a result of a very significant focus on creating a high-performance organization, this is what they achieved. As they say in business terms, that's a result. Okay. Notice the two things that happened: external researchers and customer employees, and operational improvements in IT. What was interesting about the operational improvements in IT was they were driven by customer research. And on the day I was going to do the workshop with the head of IT in this organization in Kobe in Japan, he said to me in my ear just before I'm about to facilitate a 2-day workshop, "I'm changing the IT strategy today." I said, "Thank you for telling me now. I would have liked to known that a few days ago." Okay, what did they do? Well, they actually discovered that the relationship that the company had with its customers, which are doctors and hospitals and warehouse people and wholesalers, was extremely poor at that time. And they were not selling the pharmaceutical drugs in the way that they actually wanted to. Their brand delivery was not as good. And what they did was they said, well, the first thing we've got to do is improve the relationship between the doctors and ourselves, and the chief way to do that is through the sales force. So the technology given to the sales force was a business critical success factor, and it was failing. And that's why the IT guy was helping them to do that, because they were doing what they call in the pharmaceutical industry details on their laptops. Today they do them on iPads, but I'm still working with them, but it's the same idea. That single action here, based on customer data, changed the business results by 20%. Out of that 56, 20% came from IT. Interesting, yeah? So it's really telling that if you get it right, it can make a huge difference. Now, where does this all come from? It comes from a focus that high-performing organizations have. And here's a statistic which is perhaps interesting from what you're doing, what is interesting. Why is that? Sorry?
They're addressing the needs of the client better.
Yes, they're addressing the needs of their customers better, faster, better. Yeah. The one thing that all of you are aware of, 25 years ago, Tim Berners-Lee introduced the World Wide Web. Yeah. What has it done to business? It's made it a lot faster. It's made activities for customers a lot more transparent, and therefore customers have greater choice. The organizations that don't change fast enough are in trouble. And that's one of the reasons why this statistic exists. It's a really, really key aspect of it. So what actually is needed? Well, and what is needed, and this is where I hope this is going to be useful for you. This is a slide which I show to a very large number of people. It's about creating value for customers. And value from the point of view of the customer, and I'd like you to think about this in the context of the business you work in, is a combination of 4 things. The one at the bottom is the one that makes all the difference. I was telling Leah that I was on the phone waiting for Barclays to respond to me 16 minutes the other day. That's hassle. I'm a shareholder of Barclays, customer for 40 years. And people say, why are you staying there? You know, it's hassle. If you in information systems and IT can help the business get rid of that, it'll make a dramatic difference to the business organization. And it does. We know that. But we need to understand the human context of it as well. Yeah. Anyone seen this picture before? When your company next time is talking to you about a new product or a new introduction or a new change that you are helping to introduce, you can use this picture and help them to understand what it really, really means. By the way, I'll give you the slides. Okay. What is interesting about this, when as you as a customer buy a product or a service for the first time, you're making your decision based on those two in the main, because you have very little experience of the organization as a customer. But when you decide whether you're going to do a repeat purchase, you tend to use those two. Sound right? It's the same all over the world. What we need to understand, therefore, when we're thinking about improvements in our business is why do customers switch away from us? What is excellence about? And excellence is recognizing that these are the key differentiators which provides our business with a lot of extra revenue. Anyone know what the difference in terms of the improvements in service quality can mean to a business? Let's have a look. Why do people switch from one provider to another? A lot of salespeople will tell you it's because it's the price. No, it isn't. A lot of product people will tell you because the product's poor. We need to improve our product. But in fact, nearly all of it is over here. And that's where you have a big influence, because you can improve the quality of service that your customers and your businesses get. You have that opportunity. One of the things that high-performing organizations do is to focus on, therefore, and getting the right data. I'll go back to my insurance story at the beginning of the process that they're working on, and then that data helps them to understand where they're performing well and where they're not performing well. Okay, and the data has to follow something called the NEWS. Yes, I use this abbreviation to get people's attention. Okay, the NEWS are the needs, which is a basic requirement. The wants, a desire that occurs when a need is directed to a specific object that might satisfy that need, a piece of software. Okay, the expectation, which is an ideal interaction with a supplier or product or service. In other words, does the software actually do what it's meant to do in the way that it was designed to do in the first place? Yeah? And the ideal interaction is what they're measuring it against. So for you, what would be described outside your own work environment as the ideal interaction as far as software is concerned? Painless, yes. Can you think of a specific group of software pieces, items? I'm thinking of those bits of software that sit on one of these apps. Okay? We know that when we use an app, the ones that we use a lot are the ones that are easiest to use and solve our problems for us. Yeah? If any of you want a business opportunity, take the Singapore bus app and improve it, because it's awful. I've been using it in the last 2 days. Okay, there is an app called City Mapper, which is, you've seen it, yeah, brilliant. It's only for 4 cities in the world, but they're expanding it all the time. You put in where you are, where you want to go, and it tells you how to do it. That's clever. And so the benchmark is about an ideal interaction. So what do we know in our software that we're working with? What does the ideal interaction actually look like? And if you don't know the answer to that question, you need to go and get it. That's the key. And then lastly, there are things called demands, where they actually are prepared to pay for a specific product and service, which of course is what, in your case, may be the software itself. So let's take that to another level. High-performing organizations carry out research of their customers, as I showed you earlier. Let's have a look at what they actually do. The first thing they do is they go and find out what are the customer's expectations. You may have in your own organizations senior managers talking about, well, the customer doesn't expect that. And here's the first time you can start challenging them. Please, could you give me what those expectations are? You have to do it carefully, because you're going to reveal some weakness in that manager. But expectations come under 3 categories: the what, the how, and the cost. What is it I get? How do I get it as a customer? And how much do I pay for it? But then the other piece of the story is they also have a perceived experience. And this is the piece where you come in. What are currently we doing to meet those expectations of that customer? Yes? And almost invariably there will be some sort of what, how, and cost about that, but the thing that you're noticing is the gap, and the gap is the perceived value. Your job, very often, is to provide some software, which is to close that gap. Yes? Whether it's doing something faster or better, or got a wider sense of value delivered to the customer. Yes, makes sense? So, the value that they get comes in three categories. The what is about product, the how is about service, and the cost is about cost. Have we seen those three before? And on the value equation story I showed you earlier, yeah? So what is necessary for your organization is to be able to say, well, the perceived value is where the testing comes in. We need to find out whether actually in our testing process our customers are getting the value that we hope they're getting. Yes? And the only way we can do that is going back to this equation. We're going to test out what they actually get compared to what they seek to get. Make sense? Does this provide you with a certain problem? Provocative question. How many of your organizations have got customers' expectations?
At least I've seen where there is lack of clarity in expectations.
Very much so.
That is 90% of the problem is solved with what and how is discuss more and spend more time. That is going to ease all the other things, like perceived experience value. That is more like an outcome.
Yep.
The real issue is
I agree. And the danger is for organizations, as I said earlier, they make decisions based on sort of opinion.
Yes.
The person who speaks the loudest is the one who gets the things done in their way, yes? So there's a challenge for you, isn't there? There's a challenge for you, and what we have to be able to do is to provide, first of all, some evidence, and then politely invite them to look at it. It's the second bit, which is the hardest bit. But that you can do it by inviting them to think more deeply about exactly, does this actually do what the customer expects? And politely ask them, what are their expectations? Because if we don't have their expectations, we have a problem. And we can't test to the level we need to be able to.
On a perceived expectation.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. And one of the interesting things, high-performing businesses do this. High-performing businesses, 1 in 250 or less. There are very few, but they understand this story. And so getting them to be able to recognize that actually, first of all, going out and measuring expectations is the first step in the journey. The second step is then invite the customer to state what their experience is. When you're doing systems verification testing, this is the time when you can start doing that. But you have to have the data first. Okay? So let's take that to another level for you. The first thing that you do when you get expectations, you get something called a map. And these are real expectations of an organization. And you'll notice here's your service quality, and the service quality is broken down into 5 characteristics, or sometimes called dimensions. Okay? And these are ones you can use. They are the standard definitions of service quality. They're known from their initial letters as RATER, but they're known as the RATER factors. So you could blow the brains of some of your bosses by saying, well, what are the RATER factors and their expectations? But these are real examples, and one of the things that can be done, I mean, this is a schematic. It just shows you a partial story. One of the things that can be done, and we do this, is we can use crowdsourcing techniques to get more and more deeper into understanding how well an organization is actually meeting its customers' expectations. The story goes to the other side where we got product and cost. Okay? And you'll notice straight away that those two together have less expectations than this one. Why is that? Any ideas? Why are there fewer on product and cost and more on service? It's because many, many businesses today provide products which are mainly commodities. So the differentiator is in service. It's about excellence. And if you think of an organization where you are a customer that provides you with an absolutely mind-blowing experience, something that you love, I know there won't be many of them, but think of what they're doing. Can anyone give an example of a company which you love being a customer of? Lots of fries. Not many. I'll give you my favorite.
Apple.
Yes.
I know what it is.
I've had the first time in my life in about 16 years bad experience with Apple in Hong Kong about 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
First time ever.
Yeah.
Now what is interesting about them is they focus on this.
Yes.
And most people say, well, it's about a product. They sell computers. No, they don't. What's Apple's vision as a company? Anyone know? Some of you must be using Apples. What's Apple's vision as a company? It's not about computers. Nope. It's not about product. Good try. Apple's vision is... Sorry? No, it's near to that. Their vision is enriching lives.
They want to make always winning product.
No, it's not about product. It's about your life. Very big different context. So this is the company which is making products, but they're designed to enrich your lives. Therefore, when you go into the stores, except here in Singapore, because they're all resellers, they're not Apple-owned stores, their whole goal is to make you walk out of the store feeling better than you did when you walked in. That's their goal. And the boys and girls in blue t-shirts and jeans are all trained to do that. That's what it's about. Okay, there's a book, by the way, called The Apple Experience. If you want to read it, it's worth reading. I bought it here in Singapore. And it's very good. In fact, it's about 400 yards from here, I bought it. Okay, so a map of expectations, that's the first step. Then you go and survey them, and this is an example of what the survey results look like. You ask them what is the ideal experience, and you ask them what's the minimum acceptable, and you get this box called the zone of tolerance. And the scoring is dictated by where you perform. So in this case, this organisation is getting a scoring on that expectation which is above the ideal. Yes? Here they're getting one which is below the ideal. And you'll notice here that there are different sizes of gaps between the ideal score and the actual score. Prioritization of action comes from the size of the gap. And this is important for you, because if your organisation is wanting to close a gap, they start with the biggest ones. However, they don't always do that, do they? Unfortunately.
Easy ones.
They do the easy ones.
Get some brownie points.
Yes. And to a certain extent, if it's very, very easy, that's not a bad idea because it gets some traction. But the big ones are the ones the customer's going to be worried about. So when you're testing, this is the sort of question we need to be asking. What is the size of the gap between what our customers expect and what we provide? And that's the key question for you. All right, take it a bit further. This is an example of how you can take that data and use it to prioritize actions. Competitive differentiation. This is by the way, in the survey you can find out how competitors are doing as well, which is very, very useful. And one of the things you can find out is, do we have an advantage or not? And are we inner-directed or customer-directed? Clearly, if we're up here, we get greens. If we're down there, we get reds. Very simple layout and visual display. Sort of thing that you can use yourselves to illustrate whether you are actually performing in a way that the company wants. In other words, the software is going to cure the problem that the company has said it will. Does it actually do what it says on the tin? Okay, so take that to this logical level. Okay, look, so how it's actually used in testing. Well, your first aspect is to try and close the gaps. The second one is to bring them up to a level where you're meeting expectations, and then business nirvana, get to the level where it is exceeding expectations. Number of organizations that do the right-hand one, very few. Most of them are in here somewhere. A few are frequently down here. I did an organization test like this on a company recently. Nearly every single score was red. It's a bit frightening. Don't know where to begin. Okay, so let's just summarize by saying how you can use it. You need to identify the needs, expectations, wants, and demands of the customers that you really, really want to work with. Secondly, we need to think about what's the customer's perception of current performance? Where are we today? And then organize the testing by customer segments, not by functions or products. Do you do that? Probably, yeah, some of you do. Good. So it's segmented. Good. So it's not about the way we want to look at it, it's the way the customer's organized. Yeah. Focus testing on delivering specific value for each segment. Discard and improve internal policies and processes that don't add value to customers. That's the tricky one, isn't it? It's much harder to stop doing something than it is to start doing something. Yeah, discarding processes. Can we use software and IT to speed up the way that actually we work internally as an organization, therefore to deliver what our customers want? And very often that's about stopping doing things rather than starting doing things. Laser focus tests on what customers want, especially ways to improve the customer experience. And you were talking about the customer experience. So absolutely right. So what is the customer's experience? What are they delivering? Can we help that to be part of the outcomes that we seek? Special teams are put together on large accounts and projects, as I think you know. Some of you probably are doing quite a lot of work in agile development, is that right? Yes, no? Some of you, yes? One of the things that we encourage our clients to do, just as an aside, when we do strategy implementation, is do it with agile techniques. It's not software, it's about strategy implementation. So maximum period of time is a quarter. It's not 4 years, it's 4 months, 3 months, I mean. Okay, so that's the thinking. Why? Because the business environment is changing so fast. So special accounts for that. Improve those services that the customers actually say they seek, and finally create an organization-wide obsession with customers, which is not just you doing this stuff, but get other people in the business thinking in these terms as well. And that's a challenge, I do accept that. It'll depend on your influencing skills, your ability to communicate some of these things. Okay? When an organization uses this in a business context, the data tells them the areas of expectations which can be used for innovation, new product, and new software development. The performance gives them internal standards which you can absolutely use. The value propositions come from the importance, which is the data on the gap sizes, and the customer experiences give them priorities for improvement. High-performing companies use these in their scorecards and setting for strategic direction, because this is a really key aspect for it. As I was talking before the break, before we started, I was talking about Rahul Dravid. I'm a member of the MCC. I'm sort of quite keen on cricket. And one of the great things about this man is he's not only one of the finest batsmen, if not the finest batsman in the world. There will be discussions about that. But he is a man who's mastered excellence. And he's mastered excellence to such a degree, he makes it look beautiful. And that is the ultimate accolade you can give to anyone. So thinking about excellence is not just about doing it and having your checklists, but doing it really beautifully well. Take questions.
Rowan, you started about external research on customers
Yep.
and employees.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little more about the employees part?
As an employee of a company, you have expectations of the company.
Right.
We all do, by the way.
Right.
And as an employee, it's not just about pay, salaries, and benefits. It's about the way that we are managed by our managers.
Culture and
Yeah. And I've been working with a software company in the last 2 years, and they have created a culture within their organization where there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of micromanagement, there was a lot of lack of process, a lot of lack of checklists. One of the things that we did was just to create quality process maps for doing the work they do. And the problem about this is it creates chaos. And people don't actually like working in chaotic organizations. It may sound funny to say that, but they like to work in smooth running businesses. And you can measure this. You can measure their expectations against measure their expectations, and then find out how well the company is actually performing. So it's an internal version of the customer research.
And most often the companies do it as an internal research as opposed to an external research.
No, it's always done externally. It should. If a company suggests doing it internally, big no, because anyone, it's not objective. It lacks objectivity, and it's subject to bias. People can fill in the numbers. No, you need an external person to do that. Customer research and employee research should always be done by an external agency.
Yes.
I have one question. One of the challenges
it's easy developers, and so how do we overcome that one, especially if you've been in that same structure for
Yep.
quite a long time already?
Can I make a recommendation that you do actually start to encourage your organisation to interact with the external customer? I know it won't be easy, but the fact is at the end of the day, you will be providing them with a service, a good service, by actually saying, we can't do this properly unless we get data from the external customer. There's a benefit for you, and that is this. External customer data is objective and independent. People, whoever it is, the managing director can't argue with customer data. If he or she does, then they're actually trying to push water uphill. It's not a clever idea. But try to encourage them to look at, we need objective, independent and verifiable, measurable data on how well this is actually performing with the external customer. Because we are only part of a system of different functions inside our company which provides a valuable service to our external customers. If we don't understand how these systems fit together and how they deliver that value, we will never be successful. Stuff that Apple do, just boys and girls in t-shirts, but there's a huge organisation behind that. They see it as a system. It's not just about the function of testing or the HR function or the finance function. Yeah. So does that help? I'm afraid it's going to be a challenge for you. It's just about gently but politely ask the question.
Because most of the time we work on the assumption that the requirements they gave us is what the user really needs.
I'd like to see that data, please. How's it been formed? You can question their data if they have it. If they don't, you say, you want us to improve this stuff, but you have no evidence to show that it actually works. I'm worried about that. There's a garbage in, garbage out problem here. And we need to solve it. Okay? Another question?
Sorry, I have another question.
Yes, please do.
You mentioned about this discarding or improving policies that actually shows that customer data doesn't add value to
Yes.
the customer, right?
Mhm.
Do you have any metrics to recommend that we can use so that we can see that?
Yes, this is a bit of a complicated method for answering this. I talked about scorecards on the previous slide. Organizations which have scorecards and use them well, it's a very big if they do, because most of them don't, tend to focus only on those things which deliver value to the end customer. That means they discard things, processes, policies, activities that don't add value. Can I give you an example of this? Worked with an organisation in the last year. In fact, it's the software business. The chief financial officer of this business is the world's #1 micromanager. He's asking people inside this company to produce reports on spreadsheets. And then because he gets the initial template wrong, he sends it back because he screwed it up before he sent it to them, and then they have to do it again and again and again. That's rework. None of it is value add. It doesn't make any difference to the end customer. It is discarding, what I'm saying is discard a process which adds no value. Now this is hard for some businesses because certain people are brought up in a world where we've got to do it this way. It isn't actually the reality. The reality is, do we really need to do this at all? I'm working with another business, and it's also a financial services business, where they're growing at 120% per annum. They have a scorecard, and they only allow anyone in the company to do things if it's going to drive one of the goals on the scorecard. Everything else is discarded. It might be nice, but we don't do it. We only do things which will drive the goals in the business scorecard. It's tough. High-performing businesses are tough businesses to be in. It's tough love. Okay. Any other questions?
I think the message what you conveyed is pretty straightforward and very, very important.
Yeah.
But coming from the experience of handling testing projects and seeing how I've built the testing team, the real issue is we all understand we have to be more and more clear about what is the end user experience, customer experience. You touched upon that also. They're all very, very important things, right? But in reality, what's happening in many organizations is huge gap.
Yes,
So
I know.
it goes to the organization culture,
Yes.
leadership, and so many other factors. Right?
Yes.
I think that the real issue is how to bridge that.
Yeah.
While we understand, okay, these are all really good things, there is a research information. Even you don't need a research data to support this, which you see from a very trivial thing. I think the gap is how do we make this happen, influencing
Yes.
at the senior level?
That's the big question.
That's a real challenge.
And I think if I can guide you into thinking when you're doing the testing, you can ask the people for whom you're doing the testing
Yeah.
to say, what's the evidence that I need to be able to make sure this is working? Where's the data? And sometimes they won't like the question. I appreciate that. But it is about your ability to influence at the end of the day. You use the right word, you're 100% correct. And by the way, these are sort of things which you won't necessarily win the first time. But if you keep banging the drum as I want evidence, I want proof, if I'm going to test this properly, I'm going to need proof that it's actually working. Please help me to have that evidence. And they've been, eventually the people will okay, all right, he's asking that question again. Yes, all right, I'll go and get it. It's that sort of thing. And find people who support your thinking, actually. It's one of the other criteria I would encourage you to do. Those that actually understand what you're talking about are the ones you need to bring into your wider circle. They're not involved in the testing, but they're nevertheless engaged in what you do, particularly in the outcome. If you want to achieve the business outcome, then they've got to help you to provide the data to help you to do that. Okay, so, any more?